this video, we're going to be rounding decimals. But before we can round decimals, we need to remember how to round in general. So let's say I gave you the number 134, and I ask you to round to the tens place. Your first step needs to be to find the tens place. I know that the 3 is in the tens place, so I'm going to underline it. My next step is to draw an arrow over the number to the right, because that's the number we're going to look at. We're rounding to the tens place, but we're going to look at the ones place to see how we're going to round it. Remember our saying, 5 or more, raise the score. 4 or less, let it rest. This is a 4. So we're going to let the 3 rest. So that 4 is going to turn into a 0. We're letting the 3 rest, and we're going to bring our 1 down. 134 rounded to the tens place turns into 130. What if we had 138 and we need to round to the tens place? We're still going to underline that tens place and draw an arrow over the one to the right. But this time, it's more than a 5. So we're going to raise the score of the 3. That 3 is going to turn into a 4. We bring down the 1, that 8 becomes a 0. Make sure you bring down that 1. It gets really important. I mean, let's say we had 7,654,138. You would still round to the tens place, draw an arrow over that 8. The 8 would still become a 0. Raise the score to a 4, and you still have to bring everything else down. That's really important. I think that's where the major amount of our mess ups are going to come from. So be very careful about that. All right, let's go ahead and round to the tenths. We're going to do the first 2 together, and then you're going to do the last one on your own. Remember, if we're rounding to the tenths, we are going to first underline the number in the tenths place, which is that 5. We're going to draw an arrow to the 8. Remember, rounding to the tenths place, looking at the hundredths place. Looking at that hundredths place, I know that that 8 is more than 5. So it's going to raise the score of the 5. So I'm going to go ahead and bring over my 4 and raise that score to the 5, make it a 6. Now here's where you have to decide what you need. You could turn that 8 into a 0 and that 2 into a 0. But remember yesterday, we talked about how 4 6/10 is the same as 4 600,000. Those zeros at the end don't mean anything. You can put them there if you need them, but you don't have to because they don't mean anything. Let's go ahead and look at the next one. Round to the tenths. Underline the tenths place. Make sure you're doing this with me. Draw an arrow over the hundredths place, the place to the right. So if we're going to round, that 1 is let it rest. So we're going to bring over the 29 and 3/10. That 1 would turn into a 0. You can put it there or leave it off. You should end right there with your last number at the tenths place. Whenever you round to the tenths place, that's where the last whole number should be. 29 and 3/10. Go ahead and try this 29 and 97 hundredths and see what you get. For this one, you should have underlined, let's use green, the 9 in the tens place, tenths place, and put an arrow over the 7 in the hundredths place. It may seem a little silly, but I really do want you to put that arrow over it. It's really important. So we're going to look at the 7. The 7 means raise the score of the 9, but oh no. If I raise the score of the 9, then it's going to turn into a 10, and then, it has to go to the 27. So this 7 is going to turn this 9 into a 10, but then that 1 has to go to the 27, so we're going to get 28. That was a tricky one. So let's look at that one again. I'm going to erase what I've got. If we raise the score of the 9 plus 1 is 10. Raising that score is going to give us 10. 10 tenths is 1 whole. So we have to add that 1 whole to our 27, and we get the answer 28. Let's go ahead and work on the next section. Round to the hundredths place. Let's do these first 2 together. Remember, anytime you round to the hundredths place, you're going to underline the hundredths place. Draw an arrow over the thousandths. So that 2 means let it rest. So we're just going to copy it over. 4 and 58 hundredths. Remember, you could put a 0 on the end if you need to. But basically, that number with the arrow, it's like the arrow goes through it, and that number is gone. We're left with the number that's underlined. So 4 and 58 hundredths would round, 4 and 582 thousandths would round to 4 and 58 hundredths. Let's look at this next one. 29 and 317 thousandths. We're going to underline the 1. Draw an arrow over the 7. Make sure you are underlining and drawing an arrow. For this one, 7 is more than 5, so we're going to raise the score of the 1. That 1 is going to turn into a 2. So we've got 29 and 32 hundredths. Remember that 7 gets left off because we rounded to the number that was underlined. Go ahead and try the last one. For this one, you should have underlined the 7, drawn an arrow over the 3. We're rounding to the hundredths place, putting an arrow over the thousandths. The 3 is less than 5, so we're going to let it rest. So we're going to have 27 and 97 hundredths. You leave that 0 off or put it on. It's up to you. 27 and 97 hundredths. Don't forget to bring over that 27 and 9/10, though. All right, let's round to the ones place. This one's super fun because it's super easy. You just underline the ones place. Draw an arrow over the tenths place. 5 raises the score of the 4, so guess what? It becomes 5. That's it. That's all we got to do. Let's look at the next one. For this next one, all right, so we're going to round to the ones place. We're going to underline that ones place. We're going to draw an arrow over our tenths place. Look at that 3. That 3 says we should let it rest. So we're just going to bring over our 29. That's it. Go ahead and try this last one. For this one, you should have underlined the 7, draw an arrow over that 9. That 9 raises the score of the 7. Remember, we look at the tenths place to decide what happens to the ones place, the underlined number. Raise the score of that 7, it becomes 28. That's it. Let's look at the last 3 problems. We're going to round to the underlined number. Go ahead and do the first one. For this one, you should have drawn your arrow over the 2. Over the 2. There we go. Our 2 lets it rest because it's below 5, so we're going to let it rest. We're just going to bring it over. 25 and 8/10. Remember, we don't put anything after the underlined number. Go ahead and try the next one. For this one, you should have drawn an arrow over your 5. 5 raises the score, so we're going to raise that 2 to a 3. We're going to bring it over. 3 and 93 hundredths. Remember, we don't write anything after the underlined number. For the third one, go ahead and do it. For this one, you should have drawn an arrow over the 4. After you draw that arrow over the 4, you know that 4 lets it rest, so we're just going to bring over the 18. That's it. I hope you totally understood decimal rounding. Make sure you get that practice in and ask any questions if you have them.